Daniel Harper was not supposed to see what he saw that Thursday evening, and if traffic had been heavier on Interstate 5 or if he had stopped for gas, his life might have stayed simple a little longer, but he reached downtown Seattle earlier than planned, a warm bag of eggplant parmesan and garlic bread resting on the passenger seat beside him, meant as a small surprise for his wife, Emily, who had been working late all week at her marketing firm. On the way home he remembered that his mother-in-law, Patricia Collins, had texted him that morning about her Wi-Fi acting up again in her condo overlooking Elliott Bay, and since the building was only a few blocks from the restaurant, he decided to stop by quickly, fix the router, and then head home to enjoy dinner with Emily. Patricia lived alone during the week while her husband, Robert, stayed mostly in Portland managing his consulting business, a setup the family had accepted for years as practical and temporary, though temporary had quietly stretched into something permanent. Daniel parked in the underground garage, rode the elevator up, and walked down the softly lit hallway rehearsing in his head the simple tech steps he would take, never imagining that a routine favor would shift the way he saw his wife's family. When he reached the condo door, he noticed it was slightly open, which was unusual because Patricia was careful about security, and he knocked lightly while balancing the takeout bag in one hand. There was no answer at first, only a low murmur of voices and then laughter, warm and close, not the casual sound of neighbors chatting but something softer, more personal. Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to call out again, and gently pushed the door open just enough to announce himself, saying her name politely. What he saw next stopped him in place, Patricia sitting on the couch beside a man he had never seen before, their shoulders touching, their hands resting together between them, faces tilted toward each other in a way that spoke of familiarity deeper than friendship. Nothing inappropriate was happening, yet the closeness was undeniable, the air between them charged with emotion. Daniel felt his stomach tighten as the reality formed in his mind, because Robert, loyal and steady Robert, had been married to Patricia for over 3 decades, a marriage that had always appeared solid from the outside, filled with holiday gatherings and anniversary toasts. As Daniel stood frozen, Patricia looked up and met his eyes, and in that single second her expression shifted from contentment to shock, the color draining from her face. The man beside her followed her gaze, quickly pulling his hand away, standing awkwardly, grabbing his coat from the armrest without speaking. He walked past Daniel with lowered eyes, offering no explanation, and disappeared down the hallway, leaving a silence heavier than any argument. The door clicked shut behind him, and Daniel remained near the entrance, still holding the takeout bag as if it anchored him to normal life. Patricia stood slowly, smoothing her sweater with trembling hands, trying to gather composure, but the confident elegance she usually carried was gone, replaced by fear and regret. Daniel's mind raced with thoughts of Emily, her trust in her parents, her belief in loyalty, the way she spoke proudly of her father's dedication and her mother's grace, and he felt caught between shock and responsibility. He had not come searching for secrets, yet one had landed directly in front of him. Patricia finally spoke, her voice unsteady, asking him to sit so she could explain, and though Daniel's heart pounded, he stepped inside and closed the door gently, setting the food on the kitchen counter untouched. The living room that once felt welcoming now seemed unfamiliar, every framed photo of family vacations and smiling celebrations suddenly layered with complexity. Daniel did not shout or accuse, instead he asked one simple question, how long, and the answer, though quiet, confirmed that this was not a single mistake but an ongoing connection born from months of private meetings. Patricia tried to explain the loneliness she felt living apart from Robert, how distance had slowly replaced closeness, how conversations had become brief check-ins instead of shared dreams, and as she spoke Daniel saw not a villain but a woman who had allowed unmet needs to guide her into risky choices. Still, understanding did not erase consequence, and Daniel knew that whatever happened next would ripple through his own marriage as well. He imagined Emily's face if she learned the truth unexpectedly, imagined the heartbreak that would follow, and the weight of that possibility pressed heavily on him. Standing there in the quiet condo with city lights beginning to glow outside the windows, Daniel realized that life rarely changes with loud explosions. Sometimes it shifts in a silent room, between two people who never meant to collide with a secret. The simple act of stopping by to fix a router had uncovered something fragile and dangerous, and as Patricia looked at him with pleading eyes, he understood that the next words he chose would shape not only her future but the stability of the entire family. In that suspended moment, holding shock in one hand and compassion in the other, Daniel felt adulthood settle over him in a new way, because he now carried knowledge he never asked for, and the choice of what to do with it would define the kind of husband and man he truly was. The silence in Patricia's condo felt heavier than the Seattle rain tapping against the tall windows, and Daniel stood near the kitchen counter trying to steady his thoughts while she wiped her tears and asked him to sit down, her voice trembling in a way he had never heard before. He placed the untouched takeout bag aside and lowered himself into a chair across from her, noticing how small she looked without her usual confidence, and for a long moment neither of them spoke because both understood that once words were said, nothing would return to how it had been an hour earlier. Daniel finally asked quietly how long this had been going on, not with anger but with disbelief, and Patricia answered in a whisper that it had been a few months, starting innocently with conversations at a community art class before slowly becoming something more personal, something she had not planned yet had not stopped either. She explained that living apart from Robert most of the week had created distance neither of them addressed, that phone calls had turned into quick updates about bills and schedules rather than meaningful connection, and she confessed that loneliness had grown quietly inside her until attention from someone new made her feel visible again. Daniel listened without interrupting, feeling a mix of sympathy and deep concern, because he knew marriage could become routine if not protected, yet he also believed promises mattered, especially ones built over 32 years. Patricia said she never meant to hurt anyone and insisted that she still loved her husband, but love had felt different lately, more like habit than warmth, and Daniel understood the difference though he did not excuse the choice. He walked to the window overlooking Elliott Bay, watching the gray water move under the cloudy sky, and thought about Emily at home, unaware that the image of her parents' stable marriage had just cracked. He imagined how devastated she would be to learn that her mother had found comfort outside that commitment, and the idea of delivering that pain made his chest tighten. Patricia's voice broke as she admitted she had felt invisible for years, that Robert had buried himself in work believing financial security proved devotion, and that she had stopped asking for emotional closeness because she feared rejection. Daniel turned back toward her and spoke gently, saying that unspoken needs often create quiet walls, but stepping outside the marriage only builds higher ones. She nodded, knowing he was right, yet fear shadowed her expression as she asked him not to tell Emily, explaining that her daughter adored her father and would not understand the layers of distance behind the situation. Daniel felt the weight of that request settle on him like a heavy coat, because keeping the secret meant carrying it alone, while revealing it could fracture the entire family. He sat down again and chose his words carefully, saying that silence could not protect anyone forever and that secrets often grow sharper in the dark, but he also acknowledged that sudden exposure without context could cause more harm than healing. Patricia reached across the table, not to excuse herself but to plead for time, promising she would end the outside relationship if given the chance to handle it properly, and Daniel saw genuine regret in her eyes. He realized this moment was less about punishment and more about responsibility, about deciding whether truth would arrive through confrontation or courage. After a long pause he told her he needed space to think, that he would not act impulsively, but that he expected honesty moving forward. Patricia agreed quickly, relief mixing with anxiety on her face. Daniel gathered the food he had brought and walked toward the door, his mind heavy yet clear enough to know that the next steps would require patience rather than reaction. The elevator ride down felt endless as he replayed the scene in his head, wondering how something so steady from the outside could hide such quiet cracks. Driving home through damp streets glowing under city lights, he understood that what he had witnessed was not just a mistake but a signal of deeper issues left unattended for too long. When he reached his house, Emily greeted him with a tired smile and thanked him for dinner, unaware of the storm gathering behind his calm expression. As they ate at the kitchen table, she talked about her day, about deadlines and office politics, and Danielle studied her face with renewed awareness, recognizing how easy it is for distance to slip into any marriage if conversations shrink and effort fades. He responded warmly, asking questions he might have skipped before, listening more closely, because he did not want his own relationship to drift into quiet loneliness. Later that night, lying awake beside her, he stared at the ceiling and realized he now stood at a crossroads that required wisdom rather than emotion. He did not want to betray Patricia's trust, yet he could not ignore the promise he had made to protect his own marriage with honesty. The The secret pressed against his conscience, and he understood that whatever decision he made would shape not only Patricia's future but his integrity as a husband. Outside, rain continued to fall steadily over Seattle, and Daniel closed his eyes knowing that by morning he would need to decide whether silence was protection or simply delay, because the weight of truth, once discovered, rarely disappears on its own. The next morning Daniel woke with clarity instead of panic, and by the time sunlight filtered through the curtains of his Seattle home, he had already decided that carrying Patricia's secret without conditions would slowly damage his own marriage, so he called her and asked to meet again that evening at her condo, his voice calm but firm. When he arrived, she looked exhausted, as if she had not slept, and before she could begin another emotional explanation he spoke gently yet directly, telling her he would not tell Emily immediately but only if she promised to tell Robert the truth herself, because silence built on fear was not protection, it was delay. Patricia stared at him in disbelief, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, and for a moment she seemed more afraid of honesty than exposure, whispering that Robert might leave her, that decades of shared life could disappear with one confession. Daniel listened but did not soften his boundary, explaining that marriages survive mistakes more often than they survive secrets, and that if she truly believed her relationship with Robert still had meaning, then courage was the only path forward. His words were not harsh, yet they carried weight, and Patricia slowly sank into a chair, tears forming as she admitted she had not spoken openly to her husband in years about her loneliness, choosing instead to accept emotional distance as normal. Daniel reminded her that normal does not mean healthy and that long marriages require active effort, not quiet endurance. He also confessed that witnessing her situation had forced him to look at his own marriage more closely, that he had realized how easily distance could grow if left unaddressed, and that he refused to let that happen to him and Emily. Hearing this, Patricia seemed to understand that his request was not punishment but principle. She asked for a few days to prepare herself, and Daniel agreed to give her 1 week, making it clear that after that he would not continue hiding the truth if nothing changed. The days that followed were tense, as Daniel balanced normal life with the knowledge of what was unfolding behind the scenes, noticing how Emily laughed freely during dinner conversations and how she trusted her parents completely, unaware of the difficult conversation approaching. Daniel did not act differently toward her mother, but internally he counted the days, hoping Patricia would choose honesty rather than avoidance. 3 days later his phone rang while he was at work, and Patricia's voice sounded steady but fragile as she told him she had asked Robert to drive up from Portland and that she had told him everything the night before. Daniel felt his heart race as he stepped outside his office building to hear her clearly, and she explained that the conversation had been painful, filled with tears and long silences, but also with truths neither of them had spoken in years. Robert had admitted he had prioritized work over connection, believing financial stability proved devotion, and Patricia had confessed her loneliness without blaming him, taking responsibility for her decision to seek comfort elsewhere. The man from the art class was no longer part of her life, a choice she had made before Robert arrived, wanting the conversation to be about their marriage rather than another person. Robert had not shouted or walked away, though he was deeply hurt, and instead he asked questions, seeking to understand how distance had grown so wide without either of them noticing. Patricia told Daniel that for the first time in a long while they spoke honestly about fear, aging, and feeling unseen, and that while trust would take time to rebuild, both had agreed to try counseling rather than surrendering decades of shared memories. Hearing this, Daniel felt relief wash over him, not because the problem was solved, but because truth had replaced secrecy. That evening at home he looked at Emily with renewed appreciation, recognizing that love survives not through perfection but through effort, and he asked her if they could plan a weekend away together, just the two of them, without distractions. She smiled, surprised but pleased, and agreed immediately. Daniel realized that asking for honesty from Patricia had also required honesty from himself, because he too had sometimes chosen quiet over vulnerability. When Patricia called again days later to say that she and Robert had started counseling and were spending more time in the same city, Daniel sensed that something important had shifted, not only in their marriage but in the entire family dynamic. The condition he had set for his silence had not been about control or leverage, but about accountability, and by standing firm he had helped prevent a deeper fracture. He knew there would still be difficult conversations ahead, and that healing would not be instant, yet he felt confident that choosing integrity over comfort had been the right path. As he stood by his living room window one night watching rain fall softly over the city lights, he understood that moments of crisis reveal character more than calm seasons ever do, and in that realization he felt stronger, knowing that while he could not control the choices of others, he could protect the values that guided his own life. The week that began with shock had ended with difficult truth, and though nothing was simple, everything was now real, and real, he believed, was always better than hidden. Weeks passed, and what could have shattered the Collins family slowly began to reshape it instead, not through drama but through steady effort, and Daniel watched the change unfold with quiet awareness as Patricia and Robert started spending more time in the same city, adjusting schedules that had once kept them apart, choosing shared dinners over separate routines. Counseling sessions were not easy, Patricia admitted that openly during a Sunday lunch in Portland, but they forced conversations that had been avoided for years, and Robert, though still wounded, showed a willingness to listen rather than retreat into work. Daniel observed the subtle shifts, how Robert placed his hand on Patricia's back as they walked into restaurants, how she looked at him directly when speaking instead of glancing away, and those small gestures carried more weight than grand apologies. Emily noticed the improvement too, mentioning one evening that her parents seemed more connected lately, and Daniel simply nodded, feeling relief that the truth had been faced before suspicion or accidental discovery could create deeper damage. He never revealed what he had witnessed because it was no longer about exposing a mistake but about protecting healing, and he understood that timing and intention mattered. At home, his own marriage felt steadier as well, because the experience had pushed him to invest intentionally in his relationship with Emily, planning regular date nights around Seattle's waterfront, turning off phones during meals, and speaking openly about stress instead of burying it. One quiet night as they sat on their balcony overlooking the city lights, Emily thanked him for being more present lately, saying she felt closer to him than she had in months, and Daniel realized that sometimes confronting someone else's crisis can wake you up to your own. Meanwhile, Patricia called him privately one afternoon to express gratitude, not in a dramatic way but with sincere humility, telling him that his condition had forced her to confront her fears rather than hide behind them, and that though the process had been painful, it reminded her why she had chosen Robert all those years ago. Daniel responded gently that he had only asked for honesty, and that the real work belonged to her and Robert, but deep down he felt proud that he had chosen integrity instead of silence without boundaries. Family gatherings gradually returned to normal rhythms, barbecues in the backyard, holiday planning conversations, shared laughter over old stories, and yet there was a new depth beneath the surface, a shared understanding that relationships require attention, not assumption. One evening during a summer cookout, Robert pulled Daniel aside and thanked him for supporting Patricia during a difficult time, unaware of the full story yet sensing that Daniel had been steady when things felt uncertain, and that quiet appreciation affirmed that sometimes doing the right thing does not require recognition. As months turned into a year, Patricia and Robert celebrated their 33rd anniversary with a small trip along the Oregon coast, choosing simplicity over spectacle, and when they returned they looked lighter, as if honesty had cleared the air between them. Daniel reflected often on how close everything had come to unraveling and how easily he could have reacted differently, angry exposure, emotional withdrawal, or silent resentment, but instead he had asked for truth. And that single request had redirected the course of multiple lives. He understood now that loyalty is not blind protection of wrongdoing, nor is it public judgment, but rather guiding people toward accountability with compassion. Late one evening, after Emily had fallen asleep beside him, Daniel lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing and thought about how fragile trust can be when neglected and how strong it becomes when defended early. He realized that the moment he caught Patricia was not the moment that changed everything, but the moment he decided what to ask for in exchange for silence, because he could have demanded anything, control, leverage, power, but he chose honesty instead, and that choice restored balance across the family. Life returned to its normal pace in Seattle and Portland, busy schedules and daily routines continuing as they always do, yet beneath it all there was renewed awareness that love requires courage, and that facing uncomfortable truth often prevents greater heartbreak later. Daniel no longer carried the heavy secret that once kept him awake at night, because it had transformed into a lesson about boundaries and integrity, and as he closed his eyes, He felt certain that sometimes the most powerful request a person can make is not for silence at all, but for truth spoken before it is too late.